All right, good morning again. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Miss Jocelyn Moore. She has a unique perspective to share with us today. Jocelyn has spent 15 years in the Senate in public policy and government affairs, working her way up from the legislative correspondent from a legislative correspondent to the Deputy Democratic Staff Director on the Committee on Finance. She now works for the NFL as an Executive Vice President in Communications and Public Affairs. She's going to tell us a little bit more about the NFL and how that intersection with their organization intersects with the Army and how we can work together on common issues. So please, thank you, Jocelyn, for joining us.
Really excited to be here with all of you, and thank you to the Army Public Affairs Office for having me here today.
Jocelyn, I've had a chance to go through your bio, and it's very impressive. I know you spent a considerable amount of time on working with Congress. You worked with the Glover Park Group. But how did you get to the point where you are right now, becoming the Executive Vice President of Public Communications for the NFL?
Absolutely. My story is really a anything is possible story. So when I moved to Washington in 2000, I had graduated from college. My background is in English and education. I really decided that I didn't want to pursue English and education at that time. I had been bitten by the political bug. I served as a student body vice president at the University of Florida. So once I was bitten by the political bug, I knew I had to get to Washington. So at the time, I drove my Corolla up to Washington. I did not have a job. I worked at the mall, and my sorority sister at the time was working for the Census Bureau. So I went out with her door to door that summer as she was signing up people for the census. It just so happens that my home state senator, Senator Zell Miller, got appointed to the United States Senate, and it was totally unexpected. And my mom calls, and you'll find that if you talk to me long enough, my mom is a central figure in not only my personal life, but also my professional life. So she calls, and she said, Jocelyn, you've got to apply to work for Senator Miller. You'd be great. And I said, Mom, do you know how many people want to work on Capitol Hill? There's a lot more supply than there is demand. And so why would they hire me? And so as it turns out, my mom is always right. And so I ended up applying for the job. And because I was from Georgia, Senator Miller gave me a chance. And so that was my start on Capitol Hill. And so I worked on the Hill for about 15 years. I did a lot of different things, culminating in the Senate Finance Committee, where I led all of our efforts on Finance Committee issues, from taxes to trade to Social Security to a number of other health and human services issues. After that, after 15 wonderful years on the Hill, as you mentioned, I went to go work for the Glover Park Group. And my story is really, really one of four key principles or tenets that got me to where I am today. The first is mentorship. The second is opportunity. The third is preparedness. And the fourth, again, is my mom. So at the time that I was working at the Glover Park Group, I had a boss who one day called me into his office, and he called very serious, and he said, Jocelyn, you and I need to talk. We need to have a meeting. And I said, okay, do you want to meet in my office or your office? He's like, no, we need to go to the conference room. And so he and I had never really had a meeting in the conference room, and his tone was very serious. And he said, we really need to talk. I have something I need to tell you, and I'm not really for this. And so when someone begins a conversation that way, you're not really sure what to make of it. And he proceeds to say, there's this opportunity with the National Football League. I think you should pursue it. You'd be great for their public policy position, and I really want to support you in this endeavor. And so I kind of pause, and I look at him, and I said, Joel, are you firing me? And he said, no, I'm not firing you. This opportunity just came along. You can work at the Glover Park Group as long as you want to work here, but I really think that you should pursue this opportunity. And so I kind of said, Joel, I just got here. I'd been there less than a year. I was still learning how to be a good lobbyist. And I said, look, I'm really juggling this work-life balance thing now that I'm not on the Hill. It's really exciting to have free time. And he said, well, I really think you should go out for it. And so the one thing I said to him, I was like, Joel, I'm going to call my mom. If my mom thinks that this is a good idea, then I'll pursue it. Now, my dad is the sports fan in our family, not my mom. And so I called my mom thinking she was going to say, Jocelyn, now that you've, gotten to more work-life balance, you should stay at the Glover Park Group if that's what you want to do. So I call her, and in 2 seconds flat, she says, well, of course you should go interview for the job. What's the worst that can happen? You have a job that you love, so if you don't get this one, you stay at that one. So again, mom is always right. I applied for the job at the NFL. That was to lead their Washington office. That was 2 years ago when I started that job. And again, the preparation of working on the Hill really got me ready for that opportunity. In the 2 years that I led our Washington office, I didn't anticipate that the EVP of communications job would become available. When it did, again, I was prepared, and I had another mentor, our COO, Mary Ann Turk, who really advocated for me to get the position, and so that's how I got there. So I know that's a long story, but all of those pieces along the way really helped me to get to where I am now.
So what are your primary responsibilities?
Well, there are a lot of responsibilities as the EVP of Communications and Public Affairs. I handle corporate communications, so all of our league business operations, whether it's our media operations, what we do on the legal side, the HR side, any and everything we do from a business perspective, corporate communications ladders up to me. I also handle our football communications, so everything we communicate in and around our game, that's part of what is my responsibility as well. Government affairs, obviously, that was my prior job. That levels up to communications and public affairs, and then social responsibility is also how we lead in society, our philanthropy, our volunteer efforts. And then something new that I've added since I started in this position is strategic communications. One of the things that we have really been anxious to figure out is how do we measure effectiveness at communicating? There's a lot of volume on social media, whether it's Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook. We are really trying to get better about figuring out, as we put out certain messages proactively, are those messages resonating? As we look at our fan engagement and sentiment and tonality, are those things that, are we engaging our fans in an effective way? Is the sentiment generally positive? Is it neutral? And that's what we'd like to see. So we just started a strategic communications function that we're getting off the ground right now.
So during this week, we have 2 sessions that concern about crisis communications. And an event that would fall in that category for us would be like the Fort Hood shootings, the dismal state of our hospital, Walter Reed, during 2004-2007. A soldier gets killed, and most recently, the poor housing on some of our posts. So when you have to respond, what's your guiding principle for crisis communications?
Sure. Our overarching guiding principle, communications writ large, and I'll speak specifically about crisis, we have 3 main principles: to communicate with clarity, consistency, and credibility. So in everything that we do, I'm always asking, are we being clear? Are we being consistent? Is what we're saying credible? And 2 other principles that emanate from that: are we being transparent and authentic? And so when we're in a crisis situation, we are still using those main pillars to evaluate the situation. And we've had, as everyone has read about, a number of high-profile issues, and so we approach those by saying, by adhering to those 3 principles. But obviously, in a crisis situation, you are up against the clock. And so what you never want to do in that situation, knowing that you're up against the clock, is say something wrong, say something insensitive. And so we're always reminded in difficult situations of humility and grace, and making sure that we are thinking about the human element in all of those situations. A good example for me, when I was on Capitol Hill and I was working for Senator Rockefeller, we had the Upper Big Branch mining disaster, and I wasn't in charge of our communications efforts. I was on the legislative side. But watching how, at every moment, something changed, and it was a hope and desperation and fear and grief, and so that has affected how I approach crisis communications, and just making sure humility and grace are part of what we think about, and not moving too quickly. Sometimes we have to issue a holding statement just to say we're acknowledging that something has happened, to give ourselves time to react in a way that really speaks to all parties involved, if possible.
Part of your job involves social responsibility. And the league has had some high-profile issues, such as suicides, race relations, domestic violence, and we have some of those same issues within the military. How do you educate your people in the NFL on these important issues?
We have a lot of these issues really are part of our human resources efforts, and we do have mandatory training that all employees, our thousands of employees, including players, have to go through. We are guided by a personal conduct policy, and so that personal conduct policy is very clear. It's a written policy that we make updates to sometimes annually, but we are constantly making sure that everyone knows what is expected of an employee of the National Football League. And to be quite, clear, we're in the spotlight. We're the #1, sports and entertainment entity in America, and everyone is always watching what we are doing as employees of the league, and we take that responsibility very seriously. And so the way that we address these issues, and particularly, let me start with DVSA, we have mandatory training around domestic violence and sexual assault for all of our employees. And we've really, with that training, we kind of started with the baseline level of here's what domestic violence and sexual assault are, just making sure that everybody had that baseline knowledge. And then we've kind of leveled on to that year over year, different components of that training to make sure that we're always staying current. In terms of mental health, we have an employee assistance program, which I imagine I know you all do as well. And so we make sure that all of our employees are aware of the resources that are available to them at the National Football League. We also have a crisis response team, which I am a member of, and so if there is an employee that is in crisis, that team gets together immediately to figure out how we can best support that employee and help to address the particular situation. I'll spend a little bit talking about race relations because that's obviously been an issue that has been in the news a lot relative to some of the players and their expressions of advocacy around social justice issues. That has been an issue that we have really dealt with in the public spotlight. But as the National Football League, we really want to be a leader. Our sport brings people together, and we really take pride in that. And so as we think about social justice and as the commissioner has really worked to address the concerns of players in our communities, and I'll just say a little bit, so before all of this became a public issue, the commissioner was having a number of conversations with players and in communities throughout the country because he'd heard some of the concerns about social justice. And so we were having those conversations, and we've continued over the last 2 years to really listen and learn. And so as this topic, which has gotten, a lot of attention on all sides of the issue, what we've tried to do is really educate ourselves. We've tried to encourage dialogue and understanding across the issues. And in January of last year, we partnered with our players, with NFL players, as part of the Players Coalition to create a social justice initiative. And that initiative is really a tens of millions of dollars initiative where we invest in 3 core areas. 1, improving police community relations. 2, education and economic advancement. And 3, criminal justice reform. And the players, along with teams and team owners, have really had an impact in communities across the country. We were a part of the effort to pass the criminal justice reform bill that President Trump signed into law last year, and we continue to engage in communities across the country to encourage dialogue, understanding, and really conversations, greater conversations around those issues.
So is there a better way that we can partner so that we can educate ourselves and the general public so that we have 0 instances of these issues?
Look, I think the goal, obviously, on mental health and suicide and domestic violence and sexual assault is that we have none of it. And so, and I think on race relations, our goal is to make sure we create greater understanding and greater dialogue. We are open to any partnerships in that regard, and absolutely at the team level, at the league level. I'm sure there are best practices that we could share with one another. There are probably things that you've done that would be beneficial to us. And maybe there are things that we've done that would be beneficial to the Army. So absolutely, I think there are multiple opportunities where we can partner.
So at the Office of Chief of Public Affairs, we have a new division. It's assessments. It's relatively new. It's only about a year old, but we need it because one of the toughest things to do in our job is to assess the effectiveness of our communications. So how does the NFL do that? Because it can't just be the size of the audience at the stadiums and the ratings.
Well, speaking of partnerships, this would be an area where we'd love to partner with you. As I mentioned, we just started the strategic communications function in my group, and part of the goal of StratComms is to really have our finger on the pulse of what our fans are saying about not only the game, about our issues of social responsibility, broader issues in society. And so we are really trying to get at this question of volume, tonality, sentiment, brand reputation across the board. And so we are building that capability from the ground up. We have something called a strategic communications dashboard that we just built internally with our data and analytics team. And so I think that's an area, we'd be very interested in partnering with you on, but we are still learning what is most effective. But the key is, I'll just give you an example. Sometimes we have issues that seem like they're getting a lot of attention on social media, but when you actually look at the data, either they're not getting as much, the volume is not as high as you think it is, it's just the outlets that you're paying attention to, or it has a very short shelf life. And so what we are getting very good at doing is figuring out, is this a crisis? So we are, getting more skilled at looking at, any issue that seems like it's a big deal, but we can pinpoint, is it in fact a big deal? How do we respond to it if it's just a short-term, issue? Or how do we respond to it if it looks like it's going into a crisis situation? And so I think with your assessment unit, it's very similar to what we are trying to do from a strategic communication standpoint and get better at measurement, get better at assessment so that we can communicate better with our fans.
So the NFL is one of our partners in our industry fellowship program. Can you tell us the importance of this fellowship and the benefit that it plays for the league?
We have wonderful Neil. I don't know if Neil is here today, but he is our industry fellow, training and industry fellow. The benefit to the National Football League of having a service member embedded with us is that we learn, we can share, best practices, as I mentioned earlier, but also Neil, when he comes back here, will take what he's learned from the NFL. And I think that there are, and Neil would be a better person than I to talk about the specific experiences, but I know that Neil has worked on a lot of various issues in our social responsibility and communications team. And I think that it's made him probably in a lot of ways, better at what he does. It's certainly made us better at what we do. We have a number of servicemen and women or former servicemen and women who work at the NFL. And I think, again, having that experience, when we are dealing with a variety of issues, military issues and non-military issues, is really vital to the National Football League. And so, it's a program that we want to continue. We'd like to grow it, if at all possible, and have, that interaction be an experience that more servicemen and women can experience.
So how does the NFL, the staff, the players, support those who have served and those who are currently serving?
Maybe I hope that you do. We have a program, an initiative called Salute to Service. And since, let me say a little bit more about that program. It really is our initiative to honor and connect to servicemen and women, veterans, and their families. And since 2011, the National Football League has donated over $26 million to a number of nonprofit partners, from the Pat Tillman Foundation to the Bob Woodruff Foundation, TAPS, USO. And so that is a key partnership for us. It's one that we pride ourselves on, and we really try to make sure, whether it's the teams having military flyovers at games, to having, the color guard, honoring the, national anthem, the flag, it really is part and parcel of what we do as the National Football League. For over 50 years, we've had a partnership with the USO where we send a number of NFL players abroad to meet with men and women serving our country. In April of this year, we sent a number of players to South Korea, and that was a great experience. And recently at the NFL draft, we had service members from the 2nd Infantry. They announced the draft pick for the 17th overall pick in the draft. So I heard a little shout out there. And so we were really excited about that. But it really is a longstanding partnership. We're very proud of it. We are looking at ways that we can extend our relationship with men and women in uniform. It's something that's on the mind of the commissioner each and every day. His father served. And so I think it's a really, really great initiative, and we're going to continue to find new and innovative ways to grow it and to make sure that we are giving back to those who have given us so much.
What's it like to try and manage and shape the messaging for a large organization that I would consider somewhat decentralized?
That's a tough question. Since I have started this role, I'm a pretty, I like to say, an organized person. We do have a very decentralized organization, from our clubs to NFL players to all the folks who work at the league office. But, you know, we are all operating under one mission. We are all operating toward the same goal. And so we are united in making sure that as we are talking about things publicly, that we should make sure that we are consistent, we're being clear, credible, et cetera. And so it really, over the last year, hasn't been very difficult to get alignment there, because any, misstep can be catastrophic for the National Football League. And so we've really tried to convey to everyone that let's work together. If there is a particular public affairs issue that a team is facing, let us know how we can help you. If there's a public affairs issue that the league is facing writ large, we want to be sure that everyone's part of the communication and part of, understanding what that issue is. So, I think we do a pretty good job, and, we always have, areas where we could do better. But I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure that the public affairs team and the communications team is leading our communications effort. So we don't, have, at least over the last year, and I'm going to knock on wood, we don't have any, unexpected communications, unexpected leaks, unexpected things that are getting out in the public domain. But it's no easy task. And the other point that I would make, we are updating our internal communication system. The National Football League for a long time has really been, kind of a trade association, right? We are not, people think of us as a huge corporate entity. We're actually a relatively small football league in comparison to many corporate entities. And so, we are really building some of these communications apparatus for the first time. And so in terms of internal communications, that's part of our strategic communications effort to make sure that we are communicating consistently with our employees, and that, again, we're being very clear, we're being very intentional about what we're doing, and some of those places where our employees can be ambassadors for us.
The way that you describe it, that's somewhat similar to how the Army is set up. We have a headquarters that's central, but we also have geographically displaced units. Each one of those units has a public affairs professional managing the message. So what recommendations can you give to us about how to keep the message consistent, but at the same time not micromanaging every public statement?
So one of the best things that we have found is creating better channels of communications with our 32 clubs. One of the innovations that we've created in the last year is we now have PR committees. So we have 6 PR director committees that meet every couple of months to talk about, relevant public affairs issues. So whether that's emerging issues impacting the NFL and our clubs, whether it's brand issues, there are corporate communications issues, there are public affairs issues. So we have a committee that really meets with each and every one of those clubs to make sure that we have our finger on the pulse, and clubs feel like, they know what we're doing, they know what's coming down the pike. There are no surprises except for those that, none of us can anticipate. But for the things that we know and that we can anticipate, there's no reason that we shouldn't be communicating about those. And so there are broad parameters that everyone kind of operates in. We don't have to micromanage every statement, and we don't. Obviously, the teams put out their own statements about a variety of issues. However, where there are those crisis issues that impact the league and the team, or there are those philanthropic endeavors that we are really working on as a league and with all of our clubs, we do try to make sure that we are coordinating and collaborating, and that we do have a very consistent message and cadence.
So the Army has at least one high-profile veteran playing in the league, and that's Alejandro Villanueva. But not every person has the ability and skill to play in the NFL. But if they did, how are you giving the opportunity for those individuals that are veterans or currently serving the opportunity to play in the league?
I will say it is not in my job description to determine who plays in the National Football League. That's certainly up to our coaches, general managers, our football operations staff and department. But we are very happy that Mr. Villanueva is a member of the NFL, and we are very interested in having other veterans serve, or servicemen and women, join the National Football League. Part of what we heard this week is that President Trump has opened the door to modifications to the policy about whether military service academy attendees can join the NFL and when that happens. And so we're very interested in the conversation around that. And so more to come. I would say stay tuned. I'm happy to continue that dialogue. But I would also say there are a lot of positions that are, not on field football playing positions at the National Football League, whether it's in my shop, which is communications, marketing. We have a massive media and broadcasting unit. We have football operations, player engagement. The list goes on and on. So I would say, even if you can't play football, there might be a place for you at the National Football League because, again, we have a variety of opportunities. I'm happy to connect anyone here interested in pursuing those opportunities with our Human Resources Department.
So you have an audience of public affairs professionals. What message do you want them to bring back to the Army and the general public about the relationship between the NFL and the Army?
I would just underscore how proud we are of our partnership and our relationship, and we partner in a number of ways, not only on Salute to Service, which I talked a little bit about. We also partner with the DoD on medical research. We funded the DoD and NCAA CARE Consortium. We've also worked with the Army Laboratory around helmet technology. So I would just underscore how proud we are of our relationship with our servicemen and women, and we want to continue that relationship. The second thing I would say is I would encourage all of you, if you haven't done so already, to spend time with our clubs, with players in your communities, and really continue the dialogue around, pressing issues of importance to you, but also pressing issues of importance to NFL players and our broader community.
So if it's all right with you, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience.
Absolutely. Sure, and this is a key area of partnership, and I'm glad you asked that question, so thank you. I believe there are a lot of similarities between enlisted members and our rookies. We have a rookie symposium, and every year we are trying to find ways to make sure that players coming into the National Football League have the tools and the support that they need. As you mentioned, it is a very big transition going from college, and in some cases, maybe a year or two of college, and having a very different support system, and then coming into the NFL, potentially with significant, financial resources, and having to figure out all at the same time a bright spotlight on who you are, what you do, every single moment of your life. And so our rookie symposium is really designed to be a peer-to-peer symposium. We have veteran players who are there, our legends, to really help the younger players. And that's not a relationship that just stops after that symposium. So we teach a number of life skills. That's where our training around domestic violence and sexual assault happens. The life skills training has a number of components, including how to manage your finances, how to really exist in the NFL, and some of the supports that are available to you as a rookie in the NFL. And again, that's not something that we just kind of do day one. It's an ongoing, initiative, and we have staff, our player engagement staff, not only at the league but also at every team, that really makes sure and checks in frequently with players to make sure that they're getting what they need. So I hope that answers your question. A lot of it was on-the-job training, a lot of it. My background, so I have a degree, a bachelor's in English, and I have a master's degree in counselor education. But I can tell you I use both of those every day in ways that I did not anticipate. And so I went to the University of Florida. I'm a proud Gator. And go Gators, I love it. I really learned there. The English major really taught me how to be a good communicator. Not only in terms of oral skills, but written skills as well. I thought I was going to go into counselor education, so work in student affairs and be a counselor there and work with students on a college campus. But as I said, I was in student government, and that was really the life changer for me, I was first a part of the cabinet. I led a cabinet called Organizational Outreach, and as I think about it, that has also come back in my day-to-day in terms of how the cabinets would interact with government officials, and then being student body vice president and running for student government at the University of Florida, because it's such a big institution, is like running for a public office for real. So we got a great education, a great training there, but I don't have any particular journalism training. I was not in the School of Journalism. That's why my story is really one that anything is possible. It really is. I believe that. I'm living proof of it. That's a great question. The committees are part of what we are doing to engage and make sure that we are being very clear and intentional about the communications goals and objectives of the National Football League as an entity. We also work very hard on a daily basis to build trust with each of those 32 clubs, because that's not something that, is a given. And so whether it's our government affairs team, which is talking to clubs each and every day on a variety of issues, from sports betting to, we have a player that was drafted in the 7th round from the Air Force. And so we're dealing with this waiver issue from the Air Force right now. So we have our government affairs team working on that with the Vikings. And so it's really building trust. We don't miss an opportunity to try and build trust. So if we see something in the news, if there's an opportunity for us to reach out to one of the 32 and say, hey, we'd like to be helpful, what can we do? We don't miss that opportunity for engagement. We do have working groups, cross-departmental working groups, but also working groups that include team presidents and others, where we are engaging around key strategic priorities of the league or upcoming initiatives that we know we're all going to need to be focused on and address. So it really is a constant trust-building exercise. It's a constant, hey, we are here to help. We are an extension of you. we are here to serve. This isn't a top-down, we're going to tell you what to do. It really is, we are a resource, and we want to be that resource. And so it's a constant, me checking in with owners, it's a constant staff checking in with staff. So it's not, it's not easy, but you kind of get into that routine. But if you just, view it as we're here to serve, we're here to be an extension of your communications team, and that's how we really view it. Sure.
There's a message that the commissioner has that everybody needs to get, a crisis or something like that. How do you get information as quickly as possible to every member of the EFF?
So it's going back to those internal communications channels that, we have email lists that go out to everyone, but we are right now in the process trying to determine how we can more effectively communicate with everyone. So it's not when, the news has already hit the media, right? We have to figure out how to communicate better, like everyone, with employees while making sure that we don't, speak too soon and risk something getting out in the media. So that's a very difficult and delicate balance for us, but we have a mechanism, whether it's email, if it's something that we feel like we want to send out to everyone, we just email it out to team owners, team presidents, our internal employees. If it's a very sensitive issue, there's a smaller group. The commissioner may call a meeting. We may have a conference call with ownership. So it really just depends on what type of issue it is. But we have a variety of tools that we can communicate internally. But as I mentioned, we are constantly trying to get better at that so that our employees feel like they're part of, if not the actual decision making, that they know before news hits the media. Yes. Go Gators!
What I'm wondering, how do you crack the code? We're one of those small little installations for 78 acres for research and development. The Fort Bragg, Fort Williams, you see the council here, you see the campus there, all that stuff. But there's soldiers who are going off for research, like we have 100 soldiers still in the installation. I could throw a rock and hit the Lynn Stadium where we are. And we've only ever once had a Patriot up there, and I've been in Native for 10 years, and we've never done color guard. How do we crack that code to get ourselves where we are interacting with the team? Red Sox call us once a year, the Celtics call us once a year, the Bruins call us once a year. How do we crack that code with real big sticks?
I will take that responsibility today. I am happy to help with that. We also have Sally Donnelly. Sally, raise your hand. Many of you know Sally, Senior Advisor to former Secretary Mattis. She's part of our team. But I will take that responsibility today and happy to make those connections with the Patriots. Anything I can do to be helpful, because you are exactly right. That is a relationship we should have and we want to have. And so I'll give you my card. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you. Yes, sir. It's an essential part of our game days. Our fans love it. As you know, we love it. It's part and parcel of what we do. And so I cannot underscore, just being there in that moment when the flyover happens. And I have the great fortune of being in a lot of those games, or, when we have the color guard presenting, or the, American flag. And so we cannot, Americana, our American culture, everything, football, all of that, our military, it just goes together. It's just a natural relationship and a natural fit. And our fans, I cannot say enough about how much our fans really want to thank our servicemen and women, and that is an opportunity that, we don't take lightly and we want to continue to build on it. So extremely important for us, very, very important.
So I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
So the flip side of that, you have a crisis where you have a unnamed quarterback that takes the knee. The assessment that was done in deciding what was going with the commission on his decision to support it, not support, et cetera, knowing the audience that you just alluded to, that'd be interesting in that discussion to happen.
Absolutely. So the commissioner was very clear, and I think we've tried to be clear, but let me say a little bit about the conversations that were happening that were not public. As soon as we were in that situation and it became, but even a little bit before, as I mentioned, before any of this was ever public, the commissioner was aware that a number of players were concerned about some of the issues happening in communities where there are NFL teams around social justice. And so he had already started having those conversations with players and with community members, trying to get a better understanding of what was actually happening and what the NFL could do to help. When this all became public, and it actually didn't start with a quarterback, there was actually a team that came out with their hands up at a point before then, right? And so we knew that there was an ongoing concern and that we needed to have a dialogue about it. But that dialogue didn't just include NFL players. The commissioner came to Washington. He met with a number of veterans organizations. He met with a secretary of one of our military branches. That was obviously a confidential conversation, but was engaged and, made it very clear that this conversation was not about, the military. It wasn't about, the law enforcement. Many NFL players have family members who serve, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, extended family members who serve. And so what we try to do, and part of our challenge is always the media that wants to, find the most negative part of a story. And what we were trying to say is, look, let's have a dialogue. Let's have everybody come to the table. Let's have a conversation about what is actually happening in NFL communities across the country. And, the NFL, as the commissioner has always said, is very patriotic. And that's not a question in his mind. It's not a question in my mind. But I realize as all of this was unfolding that the narrative kind of got jumbled, if you will. But this was really about, and NFL players have been very clear. The commissioner has been clear when he's talked about this, that this is really about social justice and what can we do around education and economic advancement, what can we do to improve police-community relations in communities, and what can we do to move criminal justice reform forward. Those are the three things that NFL players are focused on, and they've worked hand in hand with servicemen and women. They've worked hand in hand with members of law enforcement to try to focus on those core issues and priorities. And so, I just want to underscore, those are the issues that we are focused on. Those are the issues that NFL players have really been trying to voice concerns about and to, advocate around.
That's great to do your side of the house, but their actions, as you saw, decrease of attendance. Your marketing side of the house, the brand protection, has to take some effect as far as decisions that were made by the commission or not, as far as publicly speaking out. One thing about social justice is not the action doesn't take it lightly. Players who don't, like most of them, and the ones that
Again, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a continuum. And I think when you're in a crisis situation, the commissioner, his priority was understanding, one, what is happening with NFL players where they are so concerned about communities and the communities in which many of them live or are from, that, you know, these actions are happening. What can we do to help? And yes, you know, is there a brand aspect to that? Absolutely. But part of what we tried to do as a brand, and this goes back to leading in society, these are not just National Football League issues. These are broad societal issues. And yes, the National Football League, our focus is always on playing football, and that's our number one priority. But when the vast majority or a significant component of our employees are saying, we have a concern, something is happening in our communities that we are very, very concerned about, and we need help addressing those issues, of course, we're going to see what we can do to try and help. And, you know, again, it isn't just the National Football League. The president, we work closely with the president on criminal justice reform to get that legislation over the finish line. We're working closely with a number of community organizations, and we have a number of governors who've been working very closely on criminal justice reform. So again, while the National Football Leagues, you know, how all this played out with us was very public, it's not a National Football League issue. This conversation is not just a National Football League conversation. And on the brand side, again, what we tried to do, and we have an Inspire Change initiative that grows out of the social justice effort, to try and encourage additional dialogue, to try and encourage understanding on all sides of this issue, to try and, again, make it not an either or, but how can we move forward together?
Recent protocols with the helmet technology and the concussion protocols that you're trying to work on?
That's a great question. We actually have a health and safety advisory committee. We have a number of scientists that advise us on health and safety. So our research methods really depend on where the science is going. We have a chief medical officer, Dr. Alan Sills, who helps us to really kind of patch in and make sure that we have our finger on the pulse in terms of the latest technology. We have really been leaders in the helmet space and making sure that we're not continuing to use helmets that probably are not the top performing, but we've led in terms of figuring out what is the technology that we need to address hits to the head. But it's not just that. We are actually working on the lower extremities to make sure that we are providing the best technology to players all of the time. So we have a number of scientists that advise us routinely on where we should go from a research perspective. I think I have a question here and then, or here, yes.
Thank you for your response to that. It triggered an idea. I was curious, with the youth now entering football at early and early ages, and parents with their concerns about their children's welfare, we share a challenge, which is to reassure parents that we're going to take good care of their sons and daughters as they move forward. So I'm curious what efforts the NFL is making to assure parents that this is a safe and smart choice to have their young person get into the sport.
Thank you for that question. I think that's another area where we could potentially partner. You're right. We do share the challenge of convincing parents that they should allow their children, whether it's to join the military or to play tackle football. What we have really started to do, and we have legends who are involved in this effort, we are on the ground in a number of states that are contemplating legislation. We really have to educate around what is and is not happening relative to head trauma and head injuries. And as I said, we let the science guide us. There was a recent publication in Lancet where you had a number of leading scientists and doctors across the world saying that we really need to take a closer look, and that the answers are not completely there in terms of head injury. And so I think for us, we want the science to guide us, and we want parents to be able to make an informed decision. So I think part of what we have to do is, again, be transparent, be clear, be credible, and talk about where the science is versus where it isn't. But also, it's a parent's choice. And there are a variety of choices for parents when it comes to youth football, from flag to tackle football. And what we've really tried to remind parents of is the skills that children learn from playing football, the leadership skills, the teamwork skills, and the list goes on and on. How to be a stronger person, how to, it builds character when you play football. And so, I think it's an ongoing dialogue, but it's one we are actively engaged in, and we'd love to partner with you in that endeavor. It's not an easy one, that's for sure.
Jason Baker, I'm with Army Pacific. My question is, from the NFL corporate level, what do you see your role in training the players in their digital presence? Do you leave that up to the teams or the Players Association? And as far as punitive training, anything related to that, we have the same thing with our soldiers. So I think it's related.
It's a great question. We want to be very careful just in terms of, just like we aren't prescriptive with clubs and about how they communicate. Players, you can't be prescriptive in how they use social media. But part of the Rookie Symposium is, education around what not to do on social media, because often you can say things that, because the spotlight is so bright, may be taken out of context, may be misunderstood. But what we are also doing as we increase our partnerships with players is we are really working to help them. Part of what we've gathered is one of our, I wouldn't say challenges, it's really an opportunity, because our players play with helmets. Getting to know players is not maybe as readily available for our fans as playing some other sports where players are not in helmets. So part of what we are trying to do from a brand and marketing perspective is really show players, whether it's in the community or in their everyday lives, who they are as people, and that does include a social media component. So you'll see around the draft, we did a lot of work talking about the road to the draft for players that were ultimately drafted, telling their stories, who they are, where they come from, really patching into their social media presence with them, and helping them kind of, express how they're more than just a football player on the field. But in terms of, that fine line of, communicating things that are fun and exciting and on brand versus communicating things that can be detrimental, it's always going to be a delicate balance. But yes, we are there, but that's, a player engagement endeavor, and something that the union is also involved with, making sure they have that constant guidance. But it's a tough one.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
Hey, ma'am. Master Sergeant Stottle from 25th ID in Schofield Barracks. In the Army, all of us in here have had to deal with this very organized Facebook page with a lot of followers. It's called the Army WTF Moments. We often find ourselves engaging in what would be sort of like a quasi-media. How do you engage that with something similar to like a Barstool Sports or a Deadspin that's not traditional, like an ESPN or a CBS?
We have to be very committed and disciplined. This goes back to those three principles of clarity, consistency, and credibility. And quite honestly, there are some things we just don't give airtime to. We are very disciplined in terms of our approach to communications, and we know that there are always going to be folks out there who are detractors or who have a different view about what we are doing. But we believe, and this goes back to measuring and looking at the data, we believe that what we are doing, we're the best determinants of how our message gets out. And that's proactively putting out messages, but it's playing offense and defense, right? And so it's having a strategy around messaging that doesn't just plan on what's right in front of you, but really is ready for those crisis moments, really kind of looking ahead to those things that you might expect from a Barstool Sports or a Deadspin, anticipating them in advance, but not letting them rule how you communicate. Sticking to your plan.
Thank you, Ms. Moore.
Thank you guys so much. This has really been awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it.